Thanks for joining us. This is the rebooted version of Community Co-Creation Conversations, where we take a more in-depth look at community co-creation and how that intersects with anti-racism. So I'm your host today, Amber Ross, a Senior Director of Learning at ALEA, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Jasmine Grieca and Tyler Reitzner, who are both Senior Associate Directors of Learning with ALEA. So when we're thinking about the term community co-creation, Tyler, can you talk to us a little bit more about what is it and where is this term coming from? Why are people looking at this now?
Absolutely. I mean, essentially, community co-creation is a bottom-up way of looking at improving systems and improving the services systems provide to the communities they're providing them to. As opposed to dictating to communities what they want and need. There's an in-depth partnership with the community where they help to develop the things they want and need, very specific to their community. And this all actually comes from the idea of co-creation, which is actually a corporate thing that was designed as a way of creating more efficient marketing strategies. So what co-creation from a corporate lens is basically you have a product or service and you create usually a technological platform where every stakeholder of that product and service has a voice in how that product and service gets designed, delivered, priced out, what are the features, all of the aspects of the product or service get co-created by every stakeholder, which in corporate world can not only mean the company that is designing and producing the service, but also those who are getting the service, the consumers, as well as the supply chain and anybody who is impacted by the service in any way, shape, or form. So you have all sorts of folks. That's why you need a technological platform. So you have all sorts of folks putting feedback and data basically into how to deliver a product and service that is going to really that's just going to have maximum value to the people that need it. In community co-creation, what we're doing is taking that concept and putting it towards government practices or social service practices or even nonprofit practices, and just looking at how do we get the community we're serving way more involved in all aspects of designing the services, implementing the services, delivering the services, what they look like. And when I say it's a bottom-up approach, that's because we're really creating a platform for the community to voice and help keep accountable to service providers that they are meeting the needs and wants of the specific communities that they're trying to provide services for. There are plenty of examples of this in European governments and cultures, specifically in England. Here in the US, we are just now really trying to put this concept in practice. And it's tough, quite frankly, for our systems, which are designed to be top down, to really get in and work with the community, to communities. It's not just community, it's communities, because there are many different communities involved in these things. And what does community mean? Who's part of these communities? Like, all of these things are things that need to be worked out. But the reason most systems in the United States don't necessarily go towards community co-creation naturally is because it's a slower process than what we're used to, and we like to get things done, whether they're right or not.
That sense of urgency. Well, so I have a question, and I'm wondering if Jasmine or Tyler, you could speak to this piece. I feel like I've heard the term human-centered design. That's kind of something that I've been hearing come up more frequently in social service circles. Is there a difference between human-centered design and community co-creation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main difference on how I interpret it is human-centered design is putting humans at the center of design. So it still has that same concept of trying to include the stakeholders that are going to be impacted by the design in the design process. Whereas community co-creation is really community as at the core of design. So it's the community, looking at the community as a whole and putting them at the table in the design process. And so there's kind of a partnership with the community and whether it's the government or whoever the other partner is, to design something that meets their needs by listening and being inclusive of the community voice. And it's really interesting because, you know, on a very general level, I think human-centered design is the general level of all humans, right? But the people, when it comes to design, are often marginalized communities and people and populations. And so when we look at the kind of how to address that, the intersection of community co-creation and human-centered design is the term design justice. And design justice is really, it's this concept where you are putting marginalized communities and the people within those communities at the center of the design process, but you're also taking that to a deeper level by elevating their voices and really empowering them to design their own process. So, and whoever the partner is really taking a step back and trying to be there as a support and resource to provide them the tools to design and self-govern, because it's that, like, the emphasis is on justice. You're trying to be inclusive of the people that the design is going to impact. And oftentimes, and Tyler touched base on this too, like, because of the foundation of how our nation of America is built when it comes to white supremacy, everything from the government structures and how we kind of dictate and design policies is through that white supremacist lens. And so what ends up happening is we have legislature and we have people in power making decisions for people and for communities and not with them. So the whole concept is moving away from that and not designing for people based on our own assumptions, thinking that we know what's best for them, because the end result then is inequity and disparities, which obviously we're trying to sway away from. I don't know, Tyler, if you have anything to add.
No, I mean, you said it great. And I think for me, I look at human-centered design and design justice as tools to be implemented for community co-creation. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's actually important to work with the communities in a human-centered design way and obviously in a design justice way, because as Jasmine just pointed out, we have a culture and systems that were created by white upper middle class people predominantly, and therefore they don't reflect many of the communities that use the services or that are impacted by those systems. And so it's really important that especially if we're trying to eliminate trauma and trying to eliminate wounding people, that we actually do it in reverse and start and stop telling people what's good for them and start really listening to them telling us what they want and need, and then being able to adjust our systems and community supports to meet those wants and needs.
So this is interesting because as I hear you both talking, I'm reflecting on some things that are coming up for me. I hear the concept of actually daring to share power, because that's something that would be required in order to engage in this process.
Absolutely.
Which then leads me to believe that this platform that you were referring to, Tyler, is something that has to be equitable. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, like, what is meant by a platform. And then also, instead of the term bottom up, it almost makes me think that it's more of like a right and left, like who's around the table versus who's down there. That's also a piece in changing your frame of reference. If I'm thinking of like a government agency and the classic way we add consumer voice, I figure, I see like a dingy conference room with people to sit at a table, and then they're there maybe once a month and they leave. Or I email out a survey and say, how do you feel about this service? Is that the kind of platform you're talking about, or what does that mean when I'm thinking of design justice?
The platforms have to reflect the communities that you're working with. Now, in co-creation through corporate lens, when I talk about platform, it was always some sort of almost social media like technological platform where you can have conversations and get real-time data. That in community co-creation, because communities have different technological accesses and different technological attitudes, that isn't going to be like just creating a technological platform, even if it's the greatest social media platform in the world, isn't necessarily going to get the job done. And frankly, neither will the surveys and just doing those types of things and trying to create even small community focus groups and things like that. Those things have failed because and they have failed. I know there's some folks who will see this and argue with me, but they have failed, and they have failed because it's still done. It's done as a way to say we have gotten community voice, we have reached out to the community, and this is what they've said. And in reality, what it's used for over and over again is to just reinforce whatever that system, whatever the preconceived notions of that system is. Like it tends to just be used to say that we need X, Y, and Z services because this is what these surveys, but they haven't proven to be efficient. They haven't proven to give us enough of an in-depth conversation. And really what community co-creation and what the platform really is, and this is going to really, upset some of the apple cart, is slowing things way the bleep down, like slowing the processes way, way down, and building relationships with the community, with the members of the communities, with the communities themselves. Building real relationships, like even if it's like just having dinner with each other, just to understand each other on a human level, is vitally important, because then you get real understanding of what it is, what the struggles are that people are going through, and what their needs and wants really are. And you see them as a human being instead of a quote unquote number or case number or something like that. Like you have to be able to have it really is all about relationship, and how do you get in relationship as an organization with a community. And that's going to be different for different communities. So it's not like there's a one size fits all answer. This is why you have to slow it down and really take the time to deliberately build equal relationships with other human beings.
Jasmine, are there any reflections when I asked some of those questions or what Tyler just shared?
Yeah, I mean, what was coming up for me, especially when you said you have to slow down and build relationships, I think it's equally important. Yes, there will be, that looks differently because there's a diverse amount of communities that are out there in the world. And it's also going to look the same when you start, because there's such a high mistrust with the communities we are trying to get justice for. And I think it's important to understand that will slow down the process because of the mistrust, because of the historical context of how the communities we're working with have been mistreated, and how they continue to be mistreated in a lot of the policies and structures that were intentionally built to disadvantage them. So I think it's really important to understand that and to really focus on building the relationships, but also understand that they are not just going to open up to you if you want to go to them and be like, what are all your problems so I can help you? So just being very conscious of that as you try to build that new way of relationships with communities.
And I think that's a great point, just to know that it's going to be different for white folks than it is for people of color. Like us white folks are going to have to get a lot more humble. We're going to have to be a lot more quiet and listen a heck of a lot more, but also do things to deconstruct white supremacy in both us and the systems that we're working in.
So it's interesting, I see some parallels here with the way that a lot of us approach trauma work, and how, building trust and your consistency over time is a key element. And at the end of the day, no matter which means or method you use, the ultimate vehicle for healing and the ultimate vehicle for change is the relationship. And I can really see some parallels here because the communities have been traumatized. And then also we know that in order to be a good steward of this type of work, there is internal reflection that is required. Like, how are you showing up at the platform, at the table? How are you showing up in the dingy conference room? What's happening inside of you, which is going to directly impact how you interact and build relationship with these communities that you're wanting to serve. Because I also thought too, Jasmine, sometimes I'm wondering if this approach also considers how in the past we're always looking to ask, well, what are your problems and how can we support or help, versus what are your victories? Where is your resilience? How have you all survived in spite of the things that our systems have done to oppress you? And is that a piece also of community co-creation, understanding and learning about the resilience and about the victory in communities?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think, I'm Indigenous, and a lot of times I feel that many of the stories that are put out there exploit the trauma and grief that many reservations are, how they're developed or underdeveloped, I guess, because of, as a result of the policies. But there's, the other side of that. Like, we are very resilient and strong people, and we historically have taken care of ourselves, and we've run our own community and had little to no issues because everyone took care of each other. So really kind of taking wisdom from that and understanding that you can totally maximize the strengths that you see within not only my community, but also all the other communities that have been oppressed and harmed in the process of making America, America.
So much to talk about.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. The wisdom of the community, not only on what they need, but also on how we survive and we bounce back, and how we continue, and how we're going to thrive in the future. Those are really important aspects. Well, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot of concepts that I think we have heard talked about in sort of our current vernacular and what's on everyone's mind when it comes to sort of social change and anti-racism. And what I'm hearing is it's important for us to explore more. It's important for us to understand what we mean when we're using these things, what our intentions are in weighing intention versus impact, because there's the potential for great harm if we aren't careful about this work, but there's also the potential for revolution, basically. Well, are there any closing reflections before we wrap up our conversation for today?
I just want to point out, we've drawn the parallels to, we've talked a lot about trauma, and for me, racism is trauma. White supremacy is wounding, and it is abuse. And so looking at it through a lens of how to heal and work through the trauma is vitally important, and it gives us direction on how to kind of move forward. So I'm excited over the next few months as we continue this vlog to really explore this with you guys and dig deep into this concept of community co-creation and what is really anti-racism, and how do you use community co-creation to build anti-racism.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and